But where do you see the current oil producing nations like the Saudi Arabias of the world headed now? Would you worry about their economic future as we see this this climate transition pan out?
I mean, I don't think that Saudi Arabia is anything like the problematic case for the move away from oil. I mean, if you just try and put some numbers on it, and even let's say like on a very optimistic scenario, say the world is only using in 20 years' time 50 million barrels of oil a day, which is about half what it is like presently. And then you say, well, where are those 50 million barrels a day going to come from? Then I'd still think that a reasonable amount of it is going to come from Saudi Arabia. Now, there are questions about
yes, but if you were to go back to your coal analogy, right? Yes, oil might still be part of the mix, but if the part of the energy mix that's growing fastest at that time is dominated by some others, like you mentioned about the shift away from coal to oil and how that brings the US and the Soviet Union as the two leading powers, then one can argue that there will be a relative decline in the power, both economically and geopolitically, that today's oil-producing nations will see as maybe battery technologies or other kind of climate technologies become the more faster-growing pieces of the energy mix. And so it might be relative. You might still be powerful, you might still be rich, but you might not be the ones that are really shaping the terms of the energy mix of the future.
Well, I think that
and as a result, the geopolitical.
Yeah, I think though that turns on really what in that scenario the 50 million barrels of oil a day are still doing, what purposes that they're being used for, and how central they are both to military power and to the future world economy. Because if they're still actually there, which is highly likely, I would have thought in this scenario to be the case, because they're incredibly difficult to replace present tense oil use with electrification, which is what we're talking about in terms of the energy transition in the very big picture. Then the need for them, the need for that oil where it's still needed is still going to be existential. And it's not like with coal that actually the issues in terms of having it go away. For instance, if you're a country like Italy in the post-Cold War world, the post-Second World War world, with not really scarcely any coal, and coal is still central to the generation of electricity at least for the first 20, 30 years after the Second World War, then whether you've got a domestic supply of coal or not is still a pretty important consideration in what kind of electricity sector that you can have. Again, it also depends, I think, on whether there's any real change in the demand for petrochemicals as a feedstock in particular. I mean, if that remains as indispensable as it does, then it's going to be oil plus low carbon energy and the technology around it. I think the direction of travel, to be honest, is that we're going to have multiple tensions in geopolitics by having a multiple source energy regime.
It's almost like a multipolar order within the energy world. That's right.
You're adding, if it's a multiple energy source world, I think you get a multiple energy driven geopolitics.